Hello and welcome. Today we're talking about slurping coffee with a spoon, also known as coffee cupping. First off, what the heck is the point? Then, how can you cup coffee yourself right at home? And lastly, why is everyone slurping so loudly? Be sure to stick around because we'll be talking about how cupping coffee at home can improve your daily coffee routine. So without further ado, let's hop into it. Hello, my name is Stephen Holm and I am with Homegrounds. We're here to help you brew and enjoy better quality coffee right at home. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and let us know in the comments down below if there's anything in particular you'd like to see us talk about. So what is coffee cupping? In very simple terms, it is a method of brewing coffee in order to taste and evaluate multiple different samples at once. Sometimes seen as the pinnacle of coffee snobbery, with a bunch of people standing around tiny cups of coffee holding spoons giving the most ridiculous descriptors. But cuppings are actually used in all steps of the seed to cup coffee process for different reasons. To start off with, they're used at origin or where the coffee is grown in order to evaluate the grade of that coffee. So sometimes that tasting is done by coffee farmers in order to evaluate their coffees and how they're tasting, but it's also done by green coffee buyers who are traveling out to those farms and tasting the farmers' coffees to determine how much they're worth and if they want to be purchasing them. And that's why coffee cupping at origin is something that's very important, because coffees are actually given a score ranging from typically 80 to 100 points. Anything below 80 points is not considered specialty grade coffee, and those points determine the value of a coffee. Now, cupping is also used in the roasting process in order for roasteries to evaluate the green coffee once it has landed to them, and it's also used in order for roasteries to evaluate how their roasting samples are turning out, whether they are underdeveloped or overdeveloped, and how they are best roasting that coffee to bring out its inherent flavor. And lastly, but a little less common, coffee cupping can be used in coffee shops, whether it's to determine what coffees a shop may want to buy from a particular roaster, or to train their employees and improve their palate, which is exactly why we'll be talking about coffee cupping at home, because it is an incredible way for you to improve your palate of tasting coffees. Because the only way to get better at tasting coffee is to taste lots of coffee. Now, many people don't realize just how different coffees can taste until they taste them side by side, comparing one to another. If you've ever had the thought, well, it's just coffee, it all kind of tastes the same, I challenge you to participate in a coffee cupping so you can see just how drastically these coffees can vary from one another. And then once you sort of get the hang of it, you can compare different coffees and figure out what sort of things you like and what you can look for in coffee purchases in the future. And lastly, coffee cuppings can just be fun. If you don't take them super seriously and maybe invite some friends over, have them bring some of their favorite coffees and you can taste all of them side by side and just have fun training your palates together. Now let's hop into the actual equipment you need to execute a coffee cupping. First off is you need coffee. Ideally at least 2 samples up to however many you want, but I would recommend starting with between 2 and 5 samples. Too many can get overwhelming, and obviously 1 wouldn't really do much unless you just want to practice your slurp. Now, in order to obtain your coffees, I recommend reaching out to a local roaster and seeing if they offer their coffees in smaller size bags, so you don't have to buy multiple 12-ounce or even pound-sized bags of different coffees. In my case, I have a friend who owns a roasting company out of Detroit, SB Coffee, and they offer 4-ounce bags, which is perfect for me. You also need the usual pieces of equipment that you need to brew coffee, such as a good quality burr grinder, a way to heat up water, any sort of kettle will do, and a scale because you're going to be needing to weigh these out pretty precisely. Now on to some of the more special things that you need for a coffee cupping. First off, you need a vessel to cup out of. Now you could just use your daily coffee mug, but you'd like to have a few of these on hand And it's nice to have them all about the same size so that you're not changing up different amounts for each one, but you can make it work if you just have a bunch of different sized mugs, and I'll be talking about that later. In my case, I just hopped online and found these. These aren't actually made for coffee cupping, they're just little Tupperwares, but they hold about 150 milliliters of water, which is perfect for cupping. And they have these handy lids, which are not necessary at all, but I weighed these out a bit ago and it's been keeping these samples fresh for me while they sit. Lastly, you need some spoons. In an ideal world, you'd have a few nice, round, deep soup spoons that you can slurp out of. I'll be talking about that later as well. In my case, I'm renting a small apartment and only seem to have these normal spoons. So I'm going to show you that you can make whatever you have on hand work. Now we're going to be using 8.25 grams of coffee per 150 milliliters of water, which is from the Specialty Coffee Association's Protocol for Coffee Cupping, which I will leave a link for in the description below. So I have gone ahead and weighed out 8.25 grams of all of these coffees. I like to cup blindly so that I don't know what each sample is as I'm tasting it. I just set all the bags underneath my table here in the order that I have them on the table, but you can also just have each corresponding bag behind its cup. It doesn't really matter, it's totally up to you. Now once you have all these portioned out, it's time to head to the grinder with them. We're gonna be using a setting slightly coarser than what you would typically use for a filter brew. In my case with my BARISTA Encore, I'm gonna be using setting 15. Now when I do go and grind these, I am gonna take a small sample from each corresponding bag and throw it in the grinder as a purge before each of these cups. And that is because most of the grinders that we're using will retain a small amount of coffee with each grind, and we want to get all of that out from the previous coffees so that these samples are true to what that actual coffee is and there isn't any bleed over from the previous grind. So I will go grind these and I will be right back. Now the fun part begins. We are going to start evaluating all of these cups, starting with the fragrance or the dry smell of the coffee grounds. Now something that I found really important when I first started cupping coffee that I recommend to everyone is to just start out by writing out your personal experience. Ignore all those fancy sheets that tell you all the things that you should be looking for in coffees and giving scores and technical details. For your first few times, just focus on what you experience in these coffees, and you start to associate your personal experiences with what other people are talking about in coffees. Now grab something that you can take notes on. I am going to use my phone. So let's get started by just smelling all of these different samples and taking note of what we get out of them. I'm gonna get rid of all of these lids here. So I won't go through every single note that I get for all of these, but as an example, in this first cup, it's very sweet smelling, almost like cherries or strawberries, like red fruit sweetness that I'm smelling out of it. It smells fermented, so right away I can tell that it is a naturally processed coffee. But like I said, if all you smell is, oh, there's a lot of smells and it smells sweet, that's great. Just keep practicing and you'll get the hang of it. All right, so I've gone through and evaluated the fragrance of all of these, and now it's time to pour the water. Per usual, we're gonna be using 195 to 205 degree Fahrenheit water for all of these. Since all of these cups are the exact same volume, I'm not gonna worry about weighing them. But if, say, you have some smaller mugs and some larger ones, I would recommend doing that just so that you have consistency all the way through. Make sure we have a timer ready because we want to start a timer as soon as we pour into that first cup. And I'll explain some of the timing as these are sitting. No particular fancy way of pouring this water other than making sure you are actually saturating all of the coffee grounds in there, that you don't have any dry spots at the top once you are done. If you are doing a lot of samples at once, just make sure that you have enough water for all of them, because nothing's worse than getting through one of your last cups and running out of water mid-pour and realizing that you can't evaluate those last few cups. I've been there. All right, so there we have water in all of our samples, and we are gonna let those sit for 4 minutes, which if you've been following our channel, you may recognize this as similar to my second method in my French press tutorial video. That method is actually based on cuppings, so that will look very similar to what we're doing here. Now, while those are sitting, you also want to grab another mug or cup or something for your spoons, and you're just gonna pour the rest of your hot water. So while these coffees are sitting for 4 minutes before skimming the grounds, give them a quick sniff, evaluate the aromas. It's okay if you don't get a whole lot out of this, but it's just nice to get a sense of how they're brewing and what they're smelling like. Now we're coming up on the 4-minute mark, so what we're gonna be doing is taking our spoon, putting it in those grounds and pushing back. And as you push back that spoon, a lot of aroma has been trapped underneath that crust on the top, and you're gonna be letting all of that out. So be sure to give it a good sniff as you're doing that. I like to do 3 stirs front to back. It doesn't really matter, just try to stay somewhat consistent with all of your coffees. Now you're going to take 2 spoons. All I had were these tiny little ones, so we will make that work. And what you're going to do, starting at the back edge of the cup, working your way around the outside, skim off whatever foam is left on that sample and discard it. They don't have to be perfectly clear of foam at the top. All you're looking for is just some liquid that you can dip a spoon in and slurp from, but not yet. We are going to wait another 5 minutes or so until these are cool enough to taste. Now we're only at about 9 minutes, so these are still gonna be a little too hot to start tasting, but a little trick is to take a sample and just touch that liquid to your lips, and you can get a good sense of whether that coffee is going to burn your tongue or not. Once your tongue is burned, goodbye tasting for the day. Now how you're gonna be doing this is you're going to be taking a sample of that liquid in the spoon, bringing it up to your mouth, and slurping in order to aspirate all that liquid across your mouth and taste it as best as possible. I've always told people that on your first time, if you cough because it went down the wrong pipe, you're doing it right. So let's get tasting. I like to do 1 quick pass through before I take any notes, just to get an overall sense of how the coffees are tasting. Make sure to rinse off your spoon between each sample so that they're not cross-contaminating. We have a whole recommendation on things to look for on our website at homegrounds.co. I'll leave a link in the description for a guide to help you in what things to look for while you taste. So as an example, this first coffee that earlier I said was smelling fermenty and like strawberries and cherries, a lot of those carried through to the tasting notes that I'm getting out of this liquid. It's very sweet, it's very strawberries, and now there's a lot of florals that are in there. This kind of lively, sweet, and yet punchy fermented taste that's really interesting to me. It's definitely a natural coffee. It's a very interesting coffee. Now we recommend continuing to taste these as they keep cooling. Sometimes I'll even taste them 30 minutes or so after that original pour, and they'll be pretty cold at that point. But a sign of a really, really well roasted coffee is if that flavor holds up all the way through getting cold. Now something that I didn't mention earlier is that if you are doing a lot of samples and you're gonna be drinking a lot of caffeine, it may be smart to have what's called a spit cup, which is pretty disgusting, but it's usually necessary so that you don't get over caffeinated. A lot of professionals use it. You just grab something like a mug or a paper cup, whatever you have on hand, and as you take these samples, you just spit it back in before you swallow so you're not taking in all that caffeine. Do whatever you want. It does get gross, but sometimes it's just necessary, say if you're cupping a bunch of coffees at midnight to make a video for YouTube. Alright, so now I've gone through all these coffees multiple times, taken some pretty good notes. Now, you may only have 1 or 2 things to say about each coffee, and that's fine, just keep doing this. And I highly recommend doing this in groups because someone may say, oh, that tastes like peaches to me, and you say, oh my gosh, that's right, that's what I was tasting in that cup, I just couldn't put it into words. I've learned a lot of things by cupping with other people and gotten a lot of good experience out of it. So like I said earlier, I'll be leaving some resources in the description below from the Specialty Coffee Association protocol for cupping and also our own guide to cupping at home. And until next time, happy brewing.